Hello, everybody. Rebecca here from the podcast, The Spiritualist. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking a moment to tune in and listen to this sample piece of my book, Reclaiming Me. This is my own personal memoir and goes into the details of my life and what has transpired through my spiritual awakening and how it all began. So once more, I want to thank you for taking this opportunity to tune in and to listen to part of my story. If this is something that you would like to continue listening to, the audiobook will be released in the coming weeks, and I will leave all the details down below so you can access the paperback, the audiobook, and the ebook at your discretion. Once more, thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy. Reclaiming Me, a story of choosing love over fear. Written by Rebecca Meisl. Narrated by Rebecca Meisl. Introduction. Spirituality has been a large part of my life ever since I can remember. I was brought up in a very religious home where our lives revolved around God, the Bible, and our Christian faith. For many years of my life, I believed that firm foundation would be the foreshadowing of my future, yet the universe had different plans. As you will see in this book, my journey takes many twists and turns, but ultimately leads me back to my true self, unconditional love, and freedom. As I share my experience with you now, it is not with the intent to tell you what you should or shouldn't believe, or to tear down belief systems or structures, but to simply share my truth. Likewise, my intention is not to disrespect my family, their beliefs, or their way of life. My parents did the best that they could to give me a loving and beautiful upbringing. They are the ones who've made me who I am today, and I am grateful. Though many may want my story to be of anger, hate, or resentment of religion, this is not my truth. Despite what I was taught, I hold no resentment and firmly believe that I had this journey for a reason. I believe that love can heal and unite all wounds and all peoples, and this is the foundation of where I choose to build from. As I share my beliefs from the past, it is meant to show you how any belief system, organization, or societal platform can truly shape our reality and how we choose to live. I want to bring awareness to the damage that can be done by the programming that these institutions have instilled, resulting in guilt and separation. This leaves no place for individuality, but instead promotes conformity and undue shame for being different. This is not in alignment with the truth. Unlike many who would say we are imperfect, sinful, and need deliverance, the universe encourages us to cast aside all shame and embrace our humanity. It only wishes to support you, love you, and guide you to your highest and greatest existence. There is nothing you need to change or to do to be loved or have an unquestionable connection with this universe. To connect is your divine right. To those who have been hurt by a religious organization or belief structure, you are not alone. Your pain is valid, but I want to remind you that you can heal and you can liberate yourself. This is only one chapter in the book of your life, and now you have the power to create what's next. You can shed the past to forge a new and live a love-based story. So please, permit yourself to be you in all your authentic glory. You are a soul integrated into a human experience, and it's time to embrace what it truly means to be the human you signed up to be. I thank each of you for allowing me to take you on my journey, and I am sending you all so much love from the bottom of my heart. Rebecca. Family and faith. My first memory was of my mother. I recall the loving embrace of her arms wrapped around me as she rocked me back and forth in her beloved rocking chair, singing softly, "Life is everlasting at last," a hymn from our congregation's songbook. I can still hear her voice and how comforting it sounded against my ear. The potency of that love was undeniable, and even then, I knew the ability love had to heal all wounds and kiss away even the deepest of hurts. As she held my body tightly wrapped in soft blankets, I felt safe, warm, and completely loved. In those early days, all I could recall was the purity of love and the bliss of my young childhood innocence. I had a loving family, and I was a child who naturally saw the best in everything, finding magic and beauty all around me. I saw through the lens of love in all its purest forms and always wore my rose-colored glasses. I found pleasure in the simple things, like the delight I'd feel when I picked a wildflower from the fields in our backyard, the warmth of the sunlight as it would touch my face, and the state of elation when I got to add another Beanie Baby to my coveted collection. Smiles were always dancing upon my lips, and laughter would thunder out of my little body as expressions of bursting joy, which quickly gave me the endearing nicknames of Bundles, short for bundles of joy, and Sunshine because of my sunny and cheerful nature. I came into this world ignorant of much else, and my positivity and zest for life were things I never knew how to hide. I didn't know of the dangers, the hurt, or the stain of corruption or toil in this world. I was innocent and pure. I was completely content in my little world of fairies, magic, and light. I was brought up in a modest home, nestled sweetly upon the flatlands of the prairies of Alberta, Canada, where we lived quietly and contently. We had all of 9 TV channels, shopped only secondhand, and spent most of our time together as a family, but it was all beautiful to me. Though many would have thought our lives were too plain or simple, to me, our life was filled to the brim with love, happiness, and every good thing. I spent most days dancing and singing, gallivanting within the free-flowing fields, and playing with my older brother John. We lived outdoors and rarely could be seen inside, often bouncing on our beloved trampoline, playing in our wooden fort, and actively teasing each other with games and good fun. I loved dancing with my mom in the kitchen as we baked fresh butterscotch brownies, singing at the top of our lungs, sharing bunk beds with my brother and giggling into the night long after bedtime, enjoying the calm winter evenings, sitting on the floor, gathered around my father, listening to him read, his soothing and animated voice ringing out clear against the silence. I remember having this insatiable thirst for life and fulfilling my every need to create a wondrous experience for myself. It was like inspiration was all around me, and I could feel the streaming of life bursting through my soul. I was connected to everything, and everything was connected to me. I would look up at the large and expansive night skies that seemed so endless and wide, painted with glistening stars, and I would count their constellations in awe. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of connection and beauty. It felt like something up there was speaking directly to my soul. The universe was alive, filling me up with its inspirations and musings every single day. When I went to bed, I was filled with excitement, waiting for the stars to visit me. Feeling myself slip into a state of weightlessness, I would wander within the glimmering lights and the planets whirling around me with a struck fascination. My mind was constantly reaching outward, further into the universe, and it always felt strangely right. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was just returning home, and I knew with every part of me this world was vast and wondrous. This enthusiasm for life, paired with my youthful innocence, seemed to fill my parents with glee and often brought many a chuckle, as if they knew something I did not. Being the youngest of 5 and being the surprise child that came later in my parents' lives, I often seemed to capture the adoring eye of my family. I only knew the unwavering love of my siblings and parents and felt completely safe and secure within it. As I entered the world, I had grown used to the commotion of my large family, the comings and goings of our home, and the different personalities and dynamics between. Though my siblings were all significantly older than me, and my sisters were already married and out of the house when I was just 7 years old, I still felt a significant bond with them. Neither age nor distance seemed to ever separate, and even though my sisters were off starting lives of their own, each ensured not to live far so we could remain together. All of us were extremely close, and if we were to have a motto, it was family was everything. And in those days, it truly was. My brother and I were attached at the hip and shared the true sibling experience, as we were closest in age at only 4 years apart. John was the person I felt most myself with, and we seemed to understand each other inexplicably. I looked up to my brother and found myself seeking his attention often. Despite his annoyance with me at times, I knew we shared a special bond and deeply understood each other. That bond served us well, and we both knew that regardless of what life brought our way, we would always be there for each other. Likewise, my sister Adele was an influential relationship in my young life. She was the middle child of the family and was 13 years my senior. When I was just a baby, Adele had been like my second mother and often would sing and rock me to sleep like I was her own. She was the first who inspired rebelliousness and curiosity. When she married, just shy of 20 years old, my brother and I often would go visit her at her new home. We would watch movies, eat junk food, and read fantasy books that opened my mind to the magical world I adored so much. I was fascinated by all the tales she would read to me, enraptured by all the curious and mystical creatures that lived in their pages, and the stories that seemed to make my soul sing. We would stay up late reading them, devouring the pages one by one with delight. She was so good at portraying each of the characters' voices distinctly and infusing laughter and playfulness in each one. My sister had this amazing way of helping us release the seriousness of life and helping us just be children. She encouraged us to be ourselves and at times to even go against the grain, despite what other members of the family did say. Whether through a novel my parents wouldn't approve, streaking my virgin hair, or getting my ears pierced against my father's will, all allowed me a small opportunity to have individuality and fun. Though I was just a young girl, I always would see her playful and wild heart, and often that free spirit was what got her into trouble as a young woman. Unbeknownst to me, previously to being married, She was always the one getting caught flirting and getting into trouble due to always pushing the boundaries. She had an infectious energy and at times viewed as dangerous and reckless. This caused some friction in her young life, yet I only saw her as the free spirit I knew her to be, untamed and wondrous. I often found myself wanting to be just like her, and as I grew, I became painfully aware of how much I stayed within her shadows. I wasn't sure if I would ever be as talented, pretty, or gregarious as my sister, but in those young years, I didn't care. It was all light, fun, and filled with love. Unlike Adele, my second oldest sister Kim and I were not close. Though I often tried to be, our age gap made things difficult. Kim was over 20 years older than I, and by the time I was only a year and a half, she was having her first child, my niece, Nora. Due to unfortunate circumstances, Kim soon became a single mom and often worked long hours to provide. As a result, Nora ended up with us most days and soon became like another sibling. Despite my dislike of sharing my mother and home, we had to make do. I didn't see much of my sister Kim because of this, and the side I did see of her was often exhausted, worn, and low. She was an angry soul, and due to her circumstances, none could place blame. She had come from my mother's first marriage and felt we had been more privileged. This at the time was a cause for friction between the family, yet we always came around. She was family, and we all needed to come back together despite anything. Due to these circumstances, this meant Nora and I ended up spending much time growing up side by side. Despite my best efforts, I did not get along well with my niece. I found her presence irritating and overwhelming due to her hyperactivity and disruptive nature. I was a child who liked to take care of my things, was extremely sentimental, and enjoyed playing alone within my imagination. Yet, when Nora came to play, my surroundings turned into chaos. Due to my mother already being overwhelmed with her responsibilities, it fell to me to keep Nora entertained, and was often required to include her in all of my doings. This caused a lot of friction between us, and I often found myself frustrated, stressed, and angry. I did not like having to share my life, my things, and above all, my mother's attention. To me, my mom was everything. My mother came from very humble beginnings and had only known a life of hardships since she came into this world. Having a mother who was often absent and a father who was trying to make ends meet, she found herself and her other siblings left to raise themselves. Witnessing the unhealthy dynamic within her own family and the lack of affection felt by her mother was what spurred her unwavering need to provide all children with a safe and loving environment. She upheld this unspoken vow when we entered the world, and she showered us with unwavering affection. She was attentive, overprotective, and at times overbearing, but it was Mom, and I loved her unquestionably. Out of all 5 children, I'd say we were the closest. I used to watch her free and fiery spirit, and thought she was the most wonderful human being in the world. It was like she was an extension of my soul, and I saw myself mirrored through her. I loved her smile and adored watching as her light blue eyes would crinkle when I made her laugh. A Newfoundlander to the core, with a strong personality, music in her bones, and flaming red hair, my mother was a force to reckon with. She was known for her gregariousness, baked goods, and hospitality. I grew up with her cuddles, hugs, kisses, and music that you could always find floating soft or painfully loud from her lips. Even at a young age, I remember being willing to do anything to make her happy and could hardly bear it when she was upset or sad. We often were so intrinsically intertwined that I became painfully aware of her every emotion, and often found myself in the position of support. If she hurt, I hurt, and the world just wouldn't be right. However, that was more often than not. I had bared witness to the shadow that grief held over my mother's life, due to not only the nature of her past, but the recent hardships that had befallen our family. Not 2 years after I entered the world, my oldest sister Haley, at just 24 years old, was in a car accident that claimed her life. Caught on an icy road, she was taken quickly, and with her, a piece of our hearts. This devastated the family to the core, and my mother took it the hardest. Haley was a beautiful soul and was loved by everyone around her. Besides her white blonde hair, she was a spitting image of my mother and was adored for her character. She had a soft and tender heart and was full of love to give, often calling me her little sunshine when held in her arms. She had so much life yet to live, and the toll of her loss was great. Though too young to fully understand, as I grew older I could feel the hole in our family and felt an undeniable need to care for my mother, who was especially affected by Haley's passing. I tried to ease her burden and quickly took up the responsibility. I used to cut her nails, help tidy the house, and tried the best I could be for my parents in all the ways I knew how. I had witnessed the pain and the sadness that lived amongst us like a haunting shadow, and I couldn't bear seeing it lingering upon my mother's heart for too long. I saw firsthand the impact loss and devastation had on our family, and ever since, we realized the importance of putting the important things first. This largely included our religious faith and the hope we held for the future. It was what held my mother together in those trying times, and this strong religious zeal was swiftly passed along to us as children. My parents were devout Jehovah's Witnesses and held to their morals, values, and principles regardless of anything that came their way. Their faith was what instilled a strong admiration within me, even as a young child. I saw firsthand how my parents put others first in their lives and did their utmost to be honest, kind, warm, and open. They were the sort who would be willing to give the shirt off their backs to help their neighbor or anyone in need. They lived by the Word of God, the Bible, and in their upstanding devotion, exercised their faith in action every day. This unwavering faith in God and our religion was what truly held vast and heavy importance in our upbringing and how we chose to live life moving forward. We weren't only Christians, but taught that we bore the sacred name of God, Jehovah, and as such it was paramount that we live up to the one and true faith. We were to put God and neighbor first above all else. We were to be loving and devoted, blameless and upright, and without shame or blemish. We knew that if we fulfilled our roles and were found worthy by God, our lives would be filled with happiness. My family strongly instructed me and my siblings through the motivation of these beliefs, which truly helped each of us do our utmost to be good people. My mother especially instilled the need for kindness and generosity and taught this from example. We often were entertaining, had many people from all different walks of life in our home, and shared everything we had, even when we didn't have much. It was our duty, responsibility, and motivation to work through love and help all who we could. This extended outward to my father, who for years dedicated his life to the selfless service of God while serving at Bethel, one of the main headquarters for Jehovah's Witnesses. This was viewed as an extraordinary privilege, as one needed to be spiritually strong in the faith to be considered. He was a live-in volunteer, assisting in the printing, publishing, and more of religious articles and their distribution. His whole life revolved around this work for many years until he met my mother. Due to the headquarters only allowing single or married couples to reside, he decided to leave to marry my mother, who already had 2 children at the time. After this decision, he remained an avid believer and maintained a rigorous spiritual routine, which was swiftly adopted by us as a family together. Due to his many responsibilities, he often was not present in my young life, yet this failed to alter my affection for him. My father was a private man, and though he always struggled with sharing his affections openly and making warm connections, this never bothered me. I remember gleefully jumping into his arms and cascading him in kisses and hugs every day and telling him how much I loved him, even if he struggled to say the words back aloud. I didn't need the confirmation. I could feel it, and I always had this inner knowing that Dad just had a hard time expressing himself. My father was a good man, with a strong stature, a logical mind, and intelligence was his virtue. He could have been anything he wanted due to his multidimensional brain and talents. Most of all, though, I admired his warm heart and wit. He often was the first one sharing a joke at the dinner table or reciting humorous poetry to our guests. He used his quirky sense of humor to endear, which worked very well on me as a child. He was the sole breadwinner of the family and tried his best to keep our family whole, stable, and secure, and often found picking up any odd job to keep our family afloat, and I admired him for that. He often cleaned movie theaters and offices to keep us going, and some nights my parents would take my brother and me along for cleaning jobs where we would all chip in to make the work light. We never minded, and most times enjoyed playing in the empty theaters or with our coloring books and toys in the lobby. When late enough, my brother and I would be tucked in and fall asleep on the entranceway benches, happy as could be. We were taught early our responsibilities to the family and the benefit of hard work. Though life was tough on my parents, financially never fully stable and constantly struggling to make ends meet, we kids enjoyed the simplicities of life and the simple joy of being together. My family was of the utmost importance, second to our religion. The success of our family life at home was fully credited to our esteemed religious faith, our strong morals, and the fact that we were not wealthy or affluent, which added to our family pride. We were humble, meek, and mild servants of God, and gladly gave what we had to Him and others. In a way that may seem odd to many, our simple lifestyle was glorified over the rich, as we had the understanding that God loves a cheerful giver, and to have anything for ourselves was selfish and self-serving. My mother often gave a lot of praise for our family's success, giving nature and selflessness to our Bible-trained consciences, and how we had been instructed to learn to be better people through our religion. For many years, the shaping and molding of our religion were what helped us truly become who we were meant to be: good, upright, and loving Christians. This strong foundation of our faith became the bedrock of our lives, and there wasn't a day that went by without it influencing our decisions and choices. Our religion was to be at the forefront of all, and not taken lightly. Since I can remember, my days were centered upon a consistent, rigorous, and solid spiritual routine. My siblings and I were trained from infancy to fear God, follow His commands, and integrate Bible teaching. The Bible was taken extremely seriously, and we followed its instruction to the letter. It was very rare that we didn't start or end our day with the Bible or Bible-based material, and oftentimes I would fall asleep listening to pre-recorded tapes and audio of Scripture. It was our whole way of life, and for many years it encompassed mine. To help you fully understand our beliefs and how influential our religion was to us as a family, Let me explain some of the fundamentals. Separation from unbelievers. Do not become unevenly yoked with unbelievers, for what portion does a faithful person have with an unbeliever? 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 and 15. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, we were taught from a very young age that the world around us was to be feared. This was because Satan, not God, was now ruling the earth to test our faith, and that was why the world was full of turmoil and suffering. Because of this, we had to consciously choose God every day and obey Him despite any of Satan's influences. We needed to steer clear of the ways of the world outside our Christian faith, and were to exercise the utmost caution for fear of falling away. We were to separate ourselves for fear of damnation. This meant that we were to have as little interaction with others outside the haven of our congregation and fellow believers, so we could remain safe. As such, we divided ourselves from the unbelievers of the world around us and resolved to keep our distance as required. Unlike some religions that choose to break off from mainstream society completely, we still chose to remain living within it, but we were to remain steadfast within our faith. We needed to be absolute in our stance and beliefs, so as not to give in to the temptation of the wicked or any harmful influence. We had to withstand the impure desires that abounded, the sinful inclinations of humanity, and remain vigilant so as not to slip or fall prey to the urges that God condemned. This included fornication, sex before marriage, smoking, drunkenness, immodesty, stealing, and even the types of entertainment we chose to partake in. We needed to ensure the purity of our faith and remain uncorrupted by the sinful nature of others who did not share in our beliefs. We knew that because of this, we would be singled out as different when we did not become sharers in their wicked works. But this judgment was one we were to wear with pride. We were considered to let people know our religion as soon as possible, to distinguish ourselves, and perhaps even convert others to our faith by our exemplary example. We had clear guidelines to follow when it came to our participation in the regular world. Our association with unbelievers was strictly limited, and only necessary contact was encouraged through work or school. Anything outside of these parameters was strongly discouraged. This meant we could not hold any friendships outside of our organization, for to do so endangered your faith, and in essence, your life. Even any outside material was to be as minimal as possible, so as not to adopt modern ideals, as many of these things acceptable in the outside world were shameful and promoted the inner workings of the devil. The movies you watched and the type of education or work you pursued were to be closely monitored by your Bible-trained conscience, so you could remain chaste and spiritually protected. Movies or material that glorified violence, immorality, or the occult were especially discouraged. And if other members saw you walking out of a movie theater that surrounded such themes, one could be sought out for spiritual help. I remember as a child needing to hide away my fantasy novels or movies when company would come, so as not to lend offense to those who may see such material as demonic or inappropriate. Many witness families at the time wouldn't even permit Disney movies due to their themes of magic, especially if there were witches or wizards involved. Thus, we were strongly encouraged to use our God-given consciences to ensure every decision we made was in alignment with our faith and not to falter, in case we displease and jeopardize our relationship with God. Our relationship with Him was a privilege and was to be earned, and we were often reminded how it was easy to lose. This made us extremely aware of even simple life choices and greatly affected our views around larger decisions, such as if we were to pursue higher education or commit to a professional career. We were to ask ourselves the cost of such pursuits. Because of the urgency of the times in which we were living, anything that required more time and effort and took away from our religious activities could put us in spiritual jeopardy. We needed to constantly evaluate our priorities and ensure we were truly putting God first and foremost. We couldn't get wrapped up in the lifestyle of those around us or fall prey to the beliefs of scientific theories like evolution or psychology that could contradict our beliefs. For all such things could weaken your faith and draw us away from the haven of our congregation. Neutrality. There is no authority except by God. Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Our devotion to God also included our stance in government, politics, and our beliefs in neutrality. We were not to be part of this world in any manner. To support politicians or man-made rulership conflicted with our beliefs. We were to remain completely neutral in any man-created conflicts and view life as extremely sacred. When faced with a choice over serving God or man, we were carefully instructed that even in times of government enforcement, never to give up our faith. We needed to stand strong if we were to have the promise and hope of everlasting life and salvation, even if that meant the cost of our lives at present. We were taught that Jehovah was the one that would officially wipe out the wicked at the appointed time, and to fight against any fellow man was not in alignment with the peace and harmony we were to uphold as Christians. These standards of remaining neutral and remaining apart from man-made governments meant we also needed to exclude ourselves from the actions of standing for the national anthem, voting, or showing any outward indication of support, as this once more was putting our trust in man over God. We resolved that any form of worship of man, including idolizing celebrities, beloved athletes, or any one person in general, was a form of false worship and demeaning to our relationship with God. Many also disapproved of participating in sporting competitions or attending such events, as they were encouraged an inappropriate spirit of competition, and once more idolizing certain teams and their members. We were to be completely cut off from any sort of false worship and from taking part in a world that was influenced by Satan and his demons. Medical care and treatments. You must not eat the blood of any sort of flesh, because the soul of every sort of flesh is its blood. Anyone eating of it will be cut off. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 14. We were to remain separate from the world and its modern ideals, even in the areas of our health and personal medical care. We were to remain loyal to the Bible and its commands to the letter, and it was very clear about its stance on blood and the sacredness of life. We were taught that the life force was in the blood, and due to the scriptures in the Bible, its stance was clear that the blood of any animal or living thing was to be poured out to God. Otherwise, there would be harsh consequences. As a result, blood transfusions were off limits to all Jehovah's Witnesses. To keep us protected in this, we all were required to have an informational card to be kept on our person every day. Its purpose was to descriptively line out our beliefs and wishes in this matter of health, so there would never be any confusion in the case of a medical emergency. When faced with such choices to accept a transfusion or not, we were required to never compromise our faith, even in dire situations. God's approval was paramount as we faced the end of this system of things, and we needed to ensure we would be among the meek who would inherit the earth and live in paradise. As Jehovah's people, we were also to preserve the sanctity of life through our choices about having children. The Bible stated that God saw even the embryo and viewed life as beginning at the moment of conception. Thus, abortions were also something that we did not condone. Even in the unfortunate circumstance that the mother or child had a life-threatening issue, we were to stay the course and respect God's perspective. Holidays and celebrations. It is Jehovah your God you must worship, and it is to him alone you must render sacred service. Matthew chapter 4, verse 10. We were not to share in any activities, no matter how harmless they may seem, that promoted loose morals or unchristian ideologies. This included many of the holidays that are popularly celebrated worldwide by the general population. This was but another area we needed to stand apart, as we were taught that the origins of most holiday celebrations truly had pagan roots. Due to the teachings found in the Bible, we were to separate ourselves from all forms of unclean worship, or worship of other gods, which included many holidays. Because of this, Jehovah's Witnesses do not engage in any holidays that have an association with paganism or other gods, which to the surprise of many includes Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and more. We also were to stay away from any holidays that promoted superstition, luck, or teachings that contradicted our own beliefs, such as promoting themes of the occult or the immortal soul. Birthday celebrations were also taught to be unchristian and have roots in paganism, which promoted the use of magic and astrology, which were strictly off limits to us as Bible believers. Although the Bible does not condemn birthdays or the celebration of them directly, we felt that because none were mentioned as being practiced by the first Christians, and the only mention of them in the Bible were occasions where immoral acts were committed, it was within our best interest to also avoid all connection with such a celebration. We were urged by the scriptures to quit touching the unclean thing and remain set apart. The resurrection and paradise. You will be with me in paradise. Luke chapter 23, verse 43. Likewise to our stance with holidays, we also had very different views on death and the afterlife. Unlike most Christian religions, we did not believe in going to heaven or hell, nor did we believe in reincarnation. We believed that when someone died, they simply were sleeping or unconscious until God awakened them again. We did not believe that the spirit transcended the body and that our loved ones who passed were conscious and able to interact with us in any way. The Bible was clear when it stated, "For dust you are, and to dust you will return." Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. Death, therefore, was a state of non-existence, and we believe that only once Jehovah himself brought about paradise on earth, that the dead would return to life, and he would resurrect them to perfect health once more. Paradise was the promised reward for those who remain steadfast, meek, and holy. A beautiful time after our great tribulation, when the earth would be restored to its former glory, as it was intended before Adam and Eve's sin. It was only the 144,000 souls, the specially chosen ones who were the best of us, and specially anointed by God himself, that were to be selected to help serve him in the heavens. It was the hope for the rest of the righteous and all who had died previously that were faithful and now sleeping, that we would return to live in peace on earth forever. Preaching the good news far and wide. And this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Matthew chapter 24, verse 14. Perhaps one of the most well-known and distinguishing actions of Jehovah's Witnesses is their preaching work. Going house to house, door to door, spreading the good news of God's kingdom far and wide. We did this for many reasons, but first and foremost to glorify God and make known his name, and also to save others from the toil and wickedness of this world. Like Jesus, who was known to be the great teacher, we desire to teach others the truth found in the Bible and help them understand what hope there was for the future. This was a duty and charge that we took extremely seriously, and were taught that all priority needed to be placed into this vital work. The Bible foretold that at any moment destruction of the wicked and those who would not accept the message would be wiped away, and we would need to warn and prepare as many people as possible. We were taught that it was life-saving work, and we were each personally responsible to do our part. Thus, all witnesses were required to participate, and my family and I worked diligently, often volunteering up to 50 hours or more a month, knocking on strangers' doors to spread the word. Even as children, we were encouraged to be involved and given presentations and outlines of what to say to those we met in our ministry service. At only 6 years old, I remember handing out leaflets to people gleefully as my parents watched proudly close by. At that young age, I already knew what was expected of me and what I would need to accomplish to make my parents and God proud, which as a child seemed to be the goal of my very existence. I became very good at the doors and speaking to people, and this only propelled me further into my zeal for the work we were doing. At 11 years old, I even was conducting a Bible study with a lady I found in our ministry. The people of my congregation beamed at my enthusiasm, and I felt that I was making a difference in people's lives. I was doing exactly what was commanded in the Bible, and I felt happy because I knew if I did these actions, I would receive God's favor. There were also varying degrees of commendation and status that were awarded to those who especially exerted themselves and faithfully dedicated their time and efforts in what was called our field service. People who volunteered 50 or more hours every month were called pioneers, and their names would be announced at our public meetings for commendation each month. Yet, it's important to know that not just anyone could participate. To be a part of our Christian ministry, one first needed to qualify as a publisher or be a fully baptized Jehovah's Witness. This meant that you met certain criteria to teach others, and you knew enough about our religion to fully participate and help. Once you did so and were deemed fit by the elders of our congregation, you could joyfully join the ranks in this vital work. Though this was not always easy for many, we were to carry on with pride, as we knew in our hearts we were doing what was required of us to gain everlasting life and to help others convert to the one and only true God. Our Christian conduct. Maintain your conduct fine among the nations, so that when they accuse you of being wrongdoers, they may be the eyewitnesses of your fine works, and as a result, glorify God on the day of his inspection. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. Aside from these more critical beliefs, our separation from the world also included how we were to act, dress, and conduct ourselves in everyday life. We were not only to take the actions required in faith, but to stand out as different. Once more, this was a source of pride for our organization, as our modesty, manners, and acts of kindness were what stood us apart. We were to do our utmost to be meek, mild, and respectful of all people, and set the correct example for all Christians. Each of us needed to have the awareness of our outer appearance, as we bore the name of God, Jehovah, and this was a title that required the most respect. When at worship or in our volunteer preaching work, women were to dress in appropriate skirts or dresses and be extremely mindful of modesty in case we stir impure thoughts or stumble another. We were to have the awareness of what was appropriate in God's eyes, down to the way we styled and dyed our hair, the makeup we put on, and the styles or trends we adhered to, as it all needed to reflect our collective identity as Jehovah's Witnesses. Men also needed to pay attention to their outward appearance, and likewise were only permitted to wear suits when at worship or preaching, and to always appear clean-shaven. Beards or long hair were not permitted, and personal tastes needed to align with our standard of being. Tattoos and excessive piercings also were prohibited and were looked upon as distasteful. In every way, we were strictly instructed to adhere to God's principles and the standards of how we were to live as outlined in the Scriptures, and we were taught this was how we could truly live good lives that were pleasing to God. Though many of the world wouldn't understand our way of life, we were happy because we knew we were doing what was right in our hearts, and we would be blessed for our faith in action. Life was a roadmap, already laid out before our feet with clear instructions of where we were to go, and if we followed, we would reach our destination. All we needed to do was listen and obey, and as a result, we would live happy, fulfilling lives and be rewarded with everlasting life and blessed with the love of God. Faith in action. Becoming one of God's chosen people was a privilege and required all of us to prove our validity and faith in action, word and deed, every day. Above personal examination and home life, we also held certain congregational responsibilities. As Jehovah's Witnesses, we took our study of the Bible extremely seriously and were required to upkeep our knowledge and faith daily. Each one of us needed to participate in our weekly meetings 3 days a week, volunteer in our preaching work as often as possible, and make time for personal study of the Scriptures and other Bible-based material published by the organization. We attended what we referred to as a book study at an assigned member's home and discussed a publication of the organization's choosing as a small group. We also had a designated family study where we discussed important Bible topics together. This was all essential for us to further our learning and education and keep strong in our faith. Strictly adhering to such a rigorous routine enabled us to thoroughly examine ourselves and our lives and stay on the road to life. We had literature such as the Daily Text to begin our day, the Watchtower and Awake magazines to read and pre-study for our weekly meetings, and many other books to read to keep us spiritually healthy. We had comments to prepare for our Q&A sections at our meetings, and at times assigned speeches that we needed to demonstrate live on stage at our place of worship, the Kingdom Hall. The talks, as we called them, were a way in which everyone could get involved, and even women and children could participate in brief demonstrations for our Christian ministry. This was an honor, considering only men were assigned the privilege to teach in the congregation. This was because no record could be found of women in the Bible holding such positions, and we all needed to heed the scriptures where the Apostle Paul instructed women to keep quiet in the meetings so that things could be done in a proper and orderly way. We were taught that for the congregation to run smoothly, God had assigned the role of teaching to just one group, the older men. Though women were to be regarded highly for their contributions to preaching and instructing other women and children within the faith, the Bible clearly outlined that they were to only hold certain positions. This was a loving provision, as we were told that when we all took up our roles gleefully and without contempt, we became complements to the man and his weighty position of authority. This contributed to the peace of our congregation and God's approval. To accomplish this, women and children were taught to be in subjection to the man and the spiritual headship arrangement with its enforced hierarchy. This arrangement meant that there was a certain order of authority that placed first God, then Christ, then man, woman, and child. This arrangement was to be humbly and gladly recognized by all, for if we were to properly display the right heart condition, we would align with humility and submissiveness. This was our role, and we needed to comply fully and completely so as not to cast disapproval upon ourselves, our family, our congregation, or God's name. All of us who identified as Jehovah's Witnesses were required to have complete devotion and faith in the Bible and listen to its teachings without question. This was not an easy task, but one that was necessary if we were to inherit God's kingdom. Men as well as women needed to qualify to hold any privileged standing within the congregation. For any to be accepted as an active participant, one needed to be morally chaste and hold an upright standing within our congregation with reputation and status. Thus, we knew even as young children we needed to behave and constantly be aware of our spiritual brothers and sisters' opinions around us. The way we presented ourselves, down to the clothes we wore, the way we spoke, and our day-to-day actions were to be closely examined to ensure we wouldn't offend. We held the name of God, and that meant we needed to uphold the highest reputation possible. This outreached to all areas of our lives, and especially applied to our Christian activities and obligations. All our doings were to be closely monitored and documented each month by the older men of the congregation, or elders. These men were given special privileges to teach and ensure the cleanness of its participants with diligent care, spiritual instruction, documentation, and close association with its members. They were to ensure that each member provided personal information such as phone numbers, home addresses, and how many volunteer hours they preached each month so they could keep track of our congregation's progress. This also made it easy for them to identify potential individuals who could be spiritually weak and be able to take quick action where necessary to save them from sin or temptation. We were taught that the elders had divine inspiration and would have God's direction to properly ensure the spiritual safety and indoctrination of our congregations. They were to be personally responsible for tending to God's flock and were to be our spiritual leaders. They too were required to have pristine spiritual reputations. Our lives had to uphold strong moral and spiritual standards if we were to enjoy the security and love of Jehovah and his congregation, as both were a privilege and not a right. To be counted as one of his chosen people was a blessing, and we needed to constantly reflect on our willingness and worthiness to earn our place. Thus, the witness faith encouraged our religion as a lifestyle, not just church to attend once a week on Sundays or to enjoy as you saw fit. We were not to cherry pick what things we liked and leave the rest. We were to take the entirety of the Bible and apply its teachings to the letter. God and his laws were absolute, and they were to come before even one's family or any sort of selfish gain. We were taught that these laws and standards began within our own personal thoughts, actions, and home life. It was highly ingrained in us every day to hyperanalyze our behaviors so we could continue to better ourselves and put on the new personality, the perfect version of self. We needed to constantly work at being our best, because without consistently striving and changing our imperfect human inclinations, we wouldn't be worthy of survival. I was taught that God's love was conditional, and despite having free will, humans must choose to live by his high standards to be blessed with eternal life or love itself. The model Christian was someone selfless, modest, loving, and humble. We were carefully instructed in all ways of how to conduct ourselves and how we could continue to help others through the foundation of love. We were to be happy and faithful slaves, joyfully giving up our needs and desires in service of others and God. We were here now to serve and repent for our imperfect condition. This was paramount if we were to uphold our spiritual standing without punishment. To slack off, take time away, or not constantly be involved with the congregation made many begin to question one's eligibility or spiritual strength. We all were to take personal responsibility for each other, due to the immoral nature of life outside our organization, and to keep us all on the straight and narrow path to life. We were taught that this was a loving action, yet sadly it often resulted in gossip and criticism for not upholding God-given commissions. Those who were labeled as insufficient were sought out by the elders for shepherding calls. This was to encourage them from the scriptures and ensure that they were not being drawn away from the flock. All priority was to be placed upon the urgency of the times in which we were living and being the best we all could be. Love for our fellow Christians was essential, and we all took it upon ourselves to ensure the spiritual safety of our fellow brothers and sisters. If we saw someone committing wrongdoing or noticed someone falling away, it was our responsibility to report them to the elders, so we did not become sharers of their shame. Each of us needed to be exceptionally careful so no wrongful ideals could influence the purity of our belief. We were not to be swayed by the temporary pleasures of this material world, and to keep a fixed eye on God's kingdom that would soon fall into place after the events of Armageddon. We found immense hope and longing for such a time when the scriptures foretold the wicked would be wiped from the earth and only the righteous would remain. Armageddon signaled the heralding of this time, and we were to work diligently every day to make sure that we would be deemed worthy to survive. The Bible prophesied that it was to come when many would least expect. We were to be constantly on guard and taught that any day judgment could be placed upon us. No mercy was to be spared, and God would take his fury out on those whose hearts were not pure or of faith. Though we were taught to love our neighbor, if they rejected the message, we would feel sad because we knew that they would be part of the mass destruction ahead. The prediction of the world's decline painted the picture of earthquakes, pestilence, war, and famine as signs that the end of days was near, and constantly we were reminded of its closeness. Often there was a strong focus on what was going wrong in the world and how it was clearly under the influence of Satan and his demons. Therefore, it was imperative that we stay separate within the haven of spiritual truth. Though Armageddon placed fear within our hearts, it also created a strong motivation to constantly do our part and stay close to the congregation. It was critical to do our best to be upright Christians, warn our neighbors of what was to come, and make sure we were living a moral life, even in the privacy of our homes. One had to strictly examine the inner workings of the soul, for if one did dare to have a wandering heart or questioning mind, God would also turn his wrath upon those who lacked in the faith. The Bible foretold a time before Armageddon when religion would become rejected, resulting in persecution. People would begin to hate religion, and we would have to endure suffering and abuse for our faith. This time was often said to be upon us at any moment, and due to the steady decline of the world, it all pointed to being a sign of the times. Often we'd practice demonstrations on stage, descriptive reading material, and video clips which depicted us being persecuted. No matter what obstacles were shown or depicted, they were adamant that we were to never renounce our faith, even if it meant death or the death of those we loved. I remember at one particular seminar in the city close to where I grew up, they gave the example of one's family being tortured in the other room and the threat of death if the main subject didn't comply with renouncing his faith. The fact was reinforced then that God was always watching and was to always come first, before family, before yourself, and all else. For if not, you risked your eternal life in paradise. We were often reminded how this life now mattered very little in the grand scheme of things, and that suffering on behalf of our God was a small price to pay for paradise. Despite the great fears that arose with these prophesied events, we found encouragement from the scriptures, and it reaffirmed our purpose for what we were doing here now. All we had to do was comply fully with all the standards from our religion, and then we would be happy and blessed. God would love us, and we would feel the blessing of the Holy Spirit, and we would be rewarded in the future. Dedication and baptism. Despite all the rules and regulations we strictly adhered to, I was completely unaware of life being any different. I didn't envy others, nor did I feel I was missing out. Though I was taught that many would view our standards of faith as strict or too confining, we found freedom through living a guided life that kept us safe from wickedness. I was taught that true freedom came from living Jehovah's way, and that the freedom portrayed in the world outside of us wasn't freedom at all. I learned that when humanity wasn't given rules or standards, one would quickly fall into darkness and live a life in shambles and regret. We all needed to follow God's laws to have peace, security, and happiness, and our way of life was the only way. Things were always black and white, and this made all of our decisions easy and direct. As a young child, I grew up with the certainty of everything. This was how life was to be, and there was no thinking beyond it. I never dreamed I one day would. My parents also ensured I stayed close to our small community. I was taught that everything was founded on love, and my parents echoed this reality through their faith in action. I could feel that love pour out from their hearts like a healing balm that not only comforted, but inspired. That kind of love was what moved me from the inside. I wanted to feel that love too. I wanted to feel the Holy Spirit, feel that unconditional love from God, and know I was deemed righteous. They taught me from the scriptures that to have that love from Jehovah, we all needed to prove our validity through our service and humble submission to his standards. This all seemed very logical to me. Love wasn't free, and we had to earn our place in God's kingdom, for if just anyone could enter his refuge, wickedness would continue to thrive. We were instructed to not judge, but to instead cultivate the core foundations of life, to love, to give, and to always do what was right. I could see that this was the way I was to receive love and approval, and swiftly began to dedicate myself to the actions required. As a result, after years of mental repetition and development, my belief systems were greatly ingrained within me, and they were completely unquestioned. Everything taught to me since childhood was as natural as someone telling me to say please and thank you. No one else ever questioned, so why would I? My parents were good and loving people, so why would I be any different by following their standards for life? Being raised in such a tight-knit community where everyone believed the same things also gave me rare opportunities to question. My brother and I were homeschooled, unable to associate much outside our family or kingdom hall, and were still very impressionable. As a result, this way of life was all I knew, and no one else inspired freedom of thought. I had no outside source or experience to compare, and due to my innocence, I truly saw no reason to question. It was just how it was, and when taught the strict standards for our life, I took them to heart without hesitation. I also knew it wasn't safe to think outside the box, even if I wanted to. If I did, I would be disapproved of by God and be one who lacked faith. Within this haven of ignorance, there was a bliss. I knew my purpose and how to fulfill it. I accepted this as our way of life and swiftly marched in line with the rest of my family and fellow spiritual brothers and sisters. I became who I believed I should be and did what was required. Soon, through the strict instruction of my religion and the diligent tutelage of my parents, I began to shift and mirror the image of perfection I knew I must become. I learned to put on the social mask, which enabled me to be accepted, wholesome, and good. I began to adapt to the life I was given and the belief system that was already chosen and laid out before me. I was helpful, generous, and kind. I did all I could to please others, forfeited my needs in their favor, and never asked for anything for myself. I quickly had to become aware of the less than desirable parts of myself and reject them so I could be holy and good. I followed my parents' examples and took every lesson taught to become just like them. Growing up, my parents were my heroes. They were truly good people, and to me, the pure embodiment of generosity. Often, they were not praised or seen for their tremendous acts of kindness, but despite no other eyes watching, mine did. I remember fondly how despite heavy snowfall, raging winds, or extremely hot weather, we would pile into our old rusty Suburban and go into our voluntary preaching work. We loved traveling into the underprivileged areas on the outskirts of town to bring food and company to those who were struggling and needed it most. Our vehicle became the highlight for all the neighborhood animals. For the moment they caught sight of us, they would come running, knowing we always had food to offer. We gave them all we had, even though we often didn't have much. We would host weddings at our home for some of our Bible students, my mom cooking a feast by herself to entertain. It made all of our hearts full, and often we would spend hours talking at length about the Bible and the great hope for our future. We genuinely cared for people. We wanted everyone to survive. Our only hope was to help all we could and be the best people we could be for God and His new paradise earth. There was a sincere innocence and beauty to what we did, and knowing the pureness of my parents' hearts up close made me feel protective of them. I swore to never take that love lightly, and I would not become a source of disappointment or pain. I knew they deserved more than what life had offered, and I felt the responsibility to do everything I could to lighten their load. As a result, I took up the responsibility for their hopes and desires for my life. When I stayed in the lane of their desires, I was happy because I was pleasing everyone around me and felt valued when I lived up to what was expected. It was as if purpose had arisen in me, and I felt needed and good enough to receive love. Helping others brought me joy, and after following in my parents' footsteps, I could see how I needed to abandon everything to help those in need. I also had a fierce desire to do what was right and win God's love. Out of everything, I wanted to feel the same calling and inspiration my parents did and feel the outpouring of the Holy Spirit surrounding me. I wanted to be loved by God Himself and feel that love embrace me. However, to do so, I knew I needed to be good enough. To do this, I had to follow the formula laid out in the Bible for success and do my utmost each day to make sure I didn't offend God by living in a way that brought glory to His name. This soon became my constant ambition. My motivation was to reach the set standards placed in front of me and to do everything within my power each day to meet them. Then I could earn love. These rules for life were consistently reinforced through our rigorous spiritual routine. Through the tutelage of the scriptures, I could see how we all had to harmonize with the Bible and what our religion told us to do. With my studies, I could see that we were God's chosen people and we needed to stand apart. To entertain other faiths or beliefs put us in a state of immediate danger. I could see from the slideshows and the statistics shown to us every week at our meetings how the world around us was not safe, wicked, and to be feared. I was shown how the holidays of those outside our religion were pagan, immoral, and not founded on true Christianity. I could see how we needed to do everything in our power to maintain chaste in a world where Satan ruled supreme. I could see how I needed to keep proving myself and be the perfect Christian to inherit God's kingdom and accept love. I knew quite quickly that I was sinful, imperfect, and human, but I needed to try my best regardless to be as perfect as I possibly could. Though God had rules and standards for us to follow, He wanted all of us to live good and moral lives and to survive the end of days. I knew that if we fell out of line or failed to have the right heart condition, we would be swiftly punished like those in the Bible who disappointed God. As a result, I swiftly got to work and dedicated myself fully to the witness faith. At the tender age of 12, I committed myself and got baptized at a large assembly in front of thousands. The baptismal process is taken very seriously. one must be of age to make the decision to dedicate their life to God and to the organization fully. To do so meant you were officially a Jehovah's Witness and that you met all the qualifications required. I had to go through 3 differing interviews and approvals from separate elders of the congregation. They each asked me questions about the Bible, about our faith, and tested my knowledge thoroughly. Some allowed me to reference books, and others require I recite answers on the spot and from memory, but I proudly aced them all, never buckling to the pressure. To the glee of my parents, I was approved to be baptized and did so at our next big assembly. We all went out for a fancy dinner afterwards, and to my surprise, my parents had saved up and purchased me a beautiful aquamarine ring to serve as a symbol of my dedication and their overwhelming pride. I never felt so happy. I was making steady progress, and I felt filled to the brim with hope and excitement for my future. I felt I was on the right path. I was doing what was right, and at last I may feel God's love upon me. Maybe now I was good enough. I remember leaving that day feeling alive and full of promise. At that time, I couldn't even fathom the gravity of that decision, nor a world where I would not be with my family or among Jehovah's people. My mind could never entertain the thought that maybe one day I would see anything beyond the life I knew. It was a complete dedication to the organization and permission granted to hand over my new life to Jehovah's Way. A vow was then made, and I had promised to forever be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. At the time, I did so happily and willingly, unaware of the events that would follow. I belonged completely to the organization, for to leave once baptized meant the unbearable. The loss of my family, my community, and the only life I ever knew. Yet this was something I never fathomed would be in my future. I only knew of this life in front of me, the love and loyalty of my family, and the standards God required. After my baptism, I went full force into my service to God. I dedicated myself fully to the ways of Jehovah and his organization, following everything they dictated to the letter. I volunteered extensively, became a dedicated pioneer, and was often praised for my zeal. With this encouragement, I thrived and worked ever more diligently on modeling myself into everything expected to bring me faith, joy, and love from God. I gripped tightly to the belief that service and productivity were the driving forces to pleasing Jehovah and achieving a relationship with him, so I put everything I could into my efforts. Though I did not have many close associates, I had the complete support and love of my family, and that was all that truly mattered to me. I was content. I was happy. I was doing everything I was supposed to and bringing my family praise. I could see how this was the roadmap of my life, and I felt I was taking every step in the right direction. Little did I know that my life was about to take a sharp turn. Listen to the rest on Rebecca's audiobook to be released in the coming weeks. If you'd like a paperback version, you can find my book available on Amazon under Reclaiming Me by Rebecca Meisl. If you would like to purchase the ebook, you can do so on my website, www.rebeccameisl.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Much love and light, Rebecca.